All right, good evening and welcome to my channel. This is educational material, and you are going to be treated to some information that you're not going to get otherwise. We cover concepts and uh, discoveries that and theories um, that the powers that be don't want you to know about, things that are hidden from your purview and that um, require a great deal of digging to uncover. And this is our 374th Bible Decode. Primarily, so far, we've been dealing with the New Testament, and we've examined all aspects of the Roman origins hypothesis. That is, all of the authors that have proffered the idea that the Romans are the true authors of the New Testament, in whole or in part, that they did so as a psychological operation against the Jews, who they just got done fighting in a war, and were concerned that they were going to, uh, you know, uh, come back and fight another one, which they did. Eventually, took about 60 years, um, a few minor skirmishes before that, but the Jews had been a big thorn in the side of the Romans ever since the Romans pulled into Judea in about 63 BC, and for over a century, was constant rebellions and um, uprisings, insurrections, and you know, the in the air, uh, from a lot of the prophecies that were made in the Old Testament, the Jews were waiting on a Messiah. They were waiting on a military commander that was going to help them overthrow the Romans, kick them out of Judea. And so the Romans instead decided to make up a story, wholly fictional, about a Jewish Messiah who was a Prince of Peace and who believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and who believed in turning the other cheek to oppression and accepting the Romans, uh, being deferential to the Romans, and condemning the Jews. Uh, and then along comes Paul, who is even more deferential to the Romans and even more condemning of the Jews. And so this kind of gives you the fingerprints of uh, the Romans' hand on writing the Gospels. But to get to the particulars, we need to take a look at the work of Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian, who was a member of the court of the Flavian Caesars. He lived at Caesar's palace, and he released his 7-volume work, War of the Jews, under the auspices of Emperor Titus. And by reading, and studying War of the Jews side by side with your Gospels, particularly the book of Luke, you'll begin to see that they were written by the same hand or hands. And if we know that Josephus was an instrument of the Romans, then we will also know that the Gospels are an instrument of the Romans. And it isn't pretty. It isn't pretty. The Romans, anybody who believes what's written in the Gospels, are in for a rude awakening, because the Romans are mean spirited. They are mocking you, they're ridiculing you, they are um, demeaning you, um, when uh, when you start to decipher the code. Uh, you will see that you are being played for a fool, and you're probably going to be angry about it, because um, That's how the Romans did things. They were masters at propaganda and mind control. They had created a number of other religions at the same time period, including the rabbinical form of Judaism that was targeted toward a different group of Jews, the Pharisees. The Christian psychological operation was targeted more at the Zealots. Um, so get your copy of Josephus. You can get a PDF for free and start going through it. And I advise you to start with, I think it's in book 3, the beginning of General Titus. Now, Titus eventually becomes Emperor Titus, but at this time he's General Titus, with the beginning of General Titus's military campaign in Judea. And then compare that with Jesus's ministry in Judea, and you will see that they are identical. Every place that Titus goes, Jesus also goes in the same order, and at each location they participate in parallel events that are exactly 40 years apart, because the story of Jesus is backdated by 40 plus years from the time that it was written. Now, we kind of know that because we scholars have determined that the Gospels were written 40 or more years after the events. Um, but uh, but we don't really see it um, from the standpoint of kind of like prophecy, where the prophecies of Jesus come true because the story of Jesus is backdated by 40 years. And so when Jesus says that Jerusalem will be destroyed and not one stone will be left upon another, um, and then that exact thing happens in the words of Josephus, in the history of Josephus, um, well, it could be seen as a prophecy come true by Jesus. But the problem is that Jesus says that the destruction of Jerusalem will be the sign of the second coming of the Son of Man. And the destruction of Jerusalem was done at the hands of Titus. And so what that does is it makes Titus the second coming of Jesus. And so they wrote that poison pill in to the script like that. Um, and throughout history, people have recognized that Titus is the second coming of Jesus. It's only been in the last 150, 200 years that um, people have moved away from that interpretation, like the theologians. Now, we are going to go back about 150 years, exactly 150 years, to check out the work here of Kersey Graves. Um, and Graves fills in some of the blanks here on the Roman origins hypothesis, because when the Romans wrote their psychological operation of the Gospels, they put in literally the kitchen sink. Everything that they could get their hands on, they put into the script, whether it was mystery religions, mythology, Norse mythology, Indian mythology, Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Roman and Greek philosophy, especially Stoicism, some cynicism. They put in alchemy, astrology, numerology, uh, and they also included, you know, some Jewish, um, you know, remnants from the Torah and other parts of that what came to be the Old Testament. Stuff that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls makes its way into the Gospels. So the Romans put in there and then a whole heavy dose of coded language. And the coded language, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow. You can, as you read through the Gospels and as you read through Josephus, you kind of start to be able to get the sense of where the coded language is. Now, now, one mindset that you can have when you look at the Gospels and Josephus is one that you go into it with, the Bible is the Word of God. Well, it's perfect. Um, well, I would say that that's an anti-truther perspective. Like that is not a truther way of looking at something. You have to look at something with discernment and with scrutiny, regardless of what it is. Um, if you're really searching for the truth, but you can have the attitude that there is not a wasted word here. If it looks like they're starting to waste words, that means that this is a code. This is part of a coded language, and in the codes are a lot of pornography, dirty jokes, mockery, uh, you know, debased, demeaning, um, all kinds of things that the Romans can laugh at you at your expense. And so, part of their thing was that they were trying to do a psychological operation on the Jews to get them to mellow out, and so they're not revolting all the time. But a secondary thing to was just strictly for entertainment, to mock them and make fun of them. And then a third motivation probably was to glorify themselves. They literally, if you look at the work of Michael Menescot's, he shows that all of the parallels between the Gospels and Josephus, of which there are over 250 just in the book of Luke, those can be graphed on a chart. And the chart makes 5 near perfect letters in Latin, the language of the Roman Caesars, APTVS, and the T and the V are, I would say, undoubtedly Titus and Vespasian, the two first emperors of the Flavian dynasty. So the Romans, not only did they write the Gospels, but they literally signed their names, put their initials on the Gospels, and they wanted to be discovered at a certain point. Maybe not during their lifetime, but they wanted to be known to have written them. So now we're knowing. Um, Now, Kersey Graves, in his book called 16 Crucified Saviors, he looks at some of the kitchen sink that the Romans put into here. He looks into the various myths and religions that show up in the Bible. So the stories that are told about Jesus have antecedents. There's nothing original in the New Testament. Everything is borrowed from some other source. And Graves goes through a number of these sources. So we're in chapter 16, which is called 16 Saviors Crucified. And we're about to start a section here called Life, Character, Religion, and Miracles of Krishna. Not Christ, but Krishna. The history of Krishna Zeus, or Jesus, as some writers spell it, which I've never seen before. But that's interesting. The history of Krishna Zeus, or Jesus, as some people spell it, is contained principally in the Bhagavad Gita, the episode portion of the Mahabharat Bible with the small g, a small b. The book is believed to be divinely inspired, like all other Bibles with small b's. And the Hindus claim for it an antiquity of 6,000 years. Like Krishna was of humble origin, and like him, had to encounter opposition and persecution. But he seems to have been more successful in the propagation of his doctrines, for it is declared he soon, quote, he soon became surrounded by many earnest followers, and the people in vast multitudes followed him, crying aloud, "This is indeed the Redeemer promised to our fathers." His pathway was thickly strewn with miracles, which consisted in healing the sick, curing lepers, restoring the dumb, deaf, and the blind, raising the dead, aiding the weak, comforting the sorrow stricken, relieving the oppressed, casting out devils, etc. He came not ostensibly to destroy the previous religion, but to purify it of its impurities and preach a better doctrine. He came, as he declared, to, quote, to reject evil and restore the reign of good, and redeem man from the consequences of the fall, and deliver the oppressed earth from its load of sin and suffering. His disciples believed him to be God himself, and millions worshipped him as such in the time of Alexander the Great, 330 BC. The hundreds of counterparts to the history of Christ, proving their histories to be almost identical, will be found enumerated in chapter 22, such as 1. His miraculous birth by a virgin; 2. The mother and child being visited by shepherds, wise men, and the angelic host who joyously sang, "In thy delivery, O favored among women, all nations shall have cause to exult." Number 3, the edict of the tyrant ruler, Kansa, ordering all the firstborn to be put to death. 4. The miraculous escape of the mother and child from his bloody decree by the parting of the waves of the river Jumna to permit them to pass through on dry ground. Number 5, the early retirement of Krishna to a desert. Number 6, his baptism or ablution in the river Ganges, corresponding to Christ's baptism in the Jordan. Number 7, his transfiguration at Madura, where he assured his disciples that, quote, "present or absent, I will always be with you." Number 8, he had a favorite disciple, Arjuna, who was his bosom friend, as John was Christ's. 9, he was anointed with oil by women, like Christ. 10, a somewhat similar fish story is also told of him, his disciples being enabled by him to catch a large drafts of fish in their nets. Like Christ, he taught much by parables and precepts. A notable sermon preached by him, by Krishna, is also reported, which we have not space for here. On one occasion, having returned from a ministerial journey, he entered Madura. The people came out in crowds to meet him, strewing the ground with the branches of coconut trees, and desiring to hear him, he addressed them in parables. The conclusion and moral of one of which, called the parable of the fishes, runs thus, quote, "And thus it is, O people of Madura, that you ought to protect the weak and each other, and not retaliate upon an enemy the wrongs he may have done to you." Here we see the peace doctrine preached in its purity, and thus it was, says a writer, that Krishna spread among the people the holy doctrines of purest morality, and initiated his hearers into the exalted principles of charity, self-denial, and self-respect at a time when the desert countries of the West were inhabited only by savage tribes. And we will add, long before Christianity was thought of. Purity of life and spiritual insight, we are told, were distinguishing traits in the character of this Oriental sin atoning Savior, and that he was often moved, uh, with compassion for the downtrodden and the suffering. A Buddhist in Ceylon who sent his son to a Christian school once remarked to a missionary, quote, "I respect Christianity as a help to Buddhism." Thus is disclosed the fact that the motives of some of the heathen in sending to Christian schools is the promotion of their own religion, which they consider superior, and in many respects most of them are. We have the remarkable admission of the Christian Examiner that Christian Examiner in capital letters, I guess that's a newspaper maybe, some kind of publication. We have the remarkable admission of the Christian Examiner that the best precepts of the Christian Bible are contained in the Hindu Bhagavad Gita. Then it is not true that Christ spake as never man spoke. And if his best precepts were previously recorded in an old heathen Bible with a small b, then they afford no proof of his divinity. This suicidal concession of the Examiner pulls up the claims of Orthodox Christianity by the roots. And many of the precepts uttered by Krishna display a profound wisdom and depth of thought equal to any of those attributed to Jesus Christ. In proof of the statement, we will cite a few examples out of the hundreds in our possession. 1. Those who do not control their passions cannot act properly toward others. 2. The evils we inflict upon others follows us as our shadows follow our bodies. 3. Only the humble are beloved of God. 4. Virtue sustains the soul as the muscles sustain the body. 5. When the poor man knocks at your door, take him and administer to his wants, for the poor are the chosen of God. 6. Let your hand be always open to the unfortunate. 7. Look not upon a woman with unchaste desires. 8. Avoid envy, covetousness, falsehood, imposture, and slander, and sexual desires. Number 9. Above all things, cultivate love for your neighbor. 10. When you die, you leave your worldly wealth behind you, but your virtues and vices follow you. Number 11. Condemn riches and worldly honor. Number 12. Seek the company of the wicked in order to reform them. 13. Do good for its own sake and expect not your reward for it on earth. Number 14. The soul is immortal, but must be pure and free from all sin and stain before it can return to him who gave it. Number 15. The soul is inclined to good when it follows the inward light. 16. The soul is responsible to God for its actions, who has established rewards and punishments. 17. Cultivate that inward knowledge which teaches us what is right and wrong. 18. Never take delight in another's misfortunes. 20. It is better to forgive an injury than avenge it. Number 20. You can accomplish by kindness what you cannot by force. 21. A noble spirit finds a cure for injustice by forgetting it. 22, pardon the offense of others, but not your own. 23, what you blame in others, do not practice yourself. 24, by forgiving an enemy, you make many friends. 25, do right from hatred of evil and not from fear of punishment. 26, a wise man corrects his own errors by observing those of others. 27, he who rules his temper conquers his greatest enemy. 28, the wise man governs his passions, but the fool obeys them. 29, be at war with men's vices, but at peace with their persons. 30, there should be no disagreement between your father's lives and your doctrine. 31, spend every day as though it were the last. 32, lead not one life in public and another in private. 33, anger in trying to torture others punishes itself. 34, a disgraceful death is honorable when you die in a good cause. 35, by growing familiar with vices, we learn to tolerate them easily. 36, we must master our evil propensities, or they will master us. 37, he who has conquered his propensities rules over a kingdom. 38, protect, love, and assist others if you would serve God. 39, from thought springs the will, and from the will action, true or false, just or unjust. 40, as the sandal tree perfumes the axe which fells it, so the good man sheds fragrance on his enemies. 41, spend a portion of each day in pious devotion. 42, to love the virtues of others is to brighten your own. 43, he who gives to the needy loses nothing himself. 44, a good, wise, and benevolent man cannot be rich. 45, much riches is a curse to the possessor. 46, the wounds of the soul are more important than those of the body. 47, the virtuous man is like the banyan tree, which shelters and protects all around it. 48, money does not satisfy the love of gain, but only stimulates it. 49, your greatest enemy is in your own bosom. 50, to flee when charged is to confess your guilt. And 51, the wounds of conscience leave a scar. Compare these 51 precepts of Krishna with the 42 precepts of Christ, and you must confess they suffer nothing by the comparison. If we had space, we would like to quote from the Vedas. We will merely cite a few examples relative to woman. He who is cursed by a woman is cursed by God. 2, God will punish him who laughs at woman's sufferings. 3, when woman is honored, God is honored. 4, the virtuous woman will have but one husband, and the right-minded man but one wife. 5, it is the highest crime to take advantage of the weakness of woman. Number 6, a woman should be loved, respected, and protected by husbands, fathers, and brothers, etc. Okay. Before we close this chapter, we must anticipate and answer an objection. It will be said that the reported amours of Krishna and his rencontre with Kansa constitute criticism on his character. If so, we will point to Christ's fight or angry combat with the money changers in the temple as an offset to it. And then it should be remembered that Krishna's disciples claim that these stories are mere fable or allegorical and are not found in the most approved or canonical writings. Okay, that's the end of that section. Next section, we're going to get into crucifixion of the Hindu Sakya about 600 BC. I believe that is the Buddha. And so we will get into that tomorrow. Um, like, share, subscribe, comment, and come back tomorrow. We're going to learn more about the 16 crucified saviors, and maybe talk a little bit about more about Bible decoding on episode number 375. So thanks for tuning in today, and um, again, please come back tomorrow, but otherwise, have a beautiful day.